It was 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. I'd just gotten off a plane from visiting friends in Utah, and I was exhausted. The man I was dating at the time had just picked me up from the airport and was now following me up the sidewalk to my front porch. But I was exhausted because I'd been having these terrible nightmares all night long about a cousin who had gone missing a few years ago. Those are my Z's, my little snores. And so I let myself into my house with a key and I asked him to leave. And so I come inside and I drop my luggage at the foot of my bed, and I decided to pick up my phone to text him an apology of some sort, or, something to kind of make myself seem like less of a jerk, I guess, in the situation. So I'm sitting on the foot of my bed with my phone in my hand, and to my surprise, my phone starts ringing, and I unlock the screen and I hold it to my ear. And my mom's on the phone, and she says that they found Cease's body, they found my cousin's body, and she's crying, and she says, she's dead, and she's asking me all these questions that I can't answer. Who would do this to her? What kind of person does this to someone? And I really don't know what to say. I don't know how to answer that. So it didn't take very long before before the local media started picking up her story. And the way that they do this is they report it in a way where they give you the most gruesome headlines with the vaguest details in the most shocking ways. So it's really, really difficult for my family to go through a situation of homicide like that. If you fast forward to about 2015, I'm sitting in the living room of my house, and I have a friend who turns on Making a Murderer. And it took me a little while to realize why I wasn't resonating with this show, or why I didn't really care for it, why it wasn't working for me. And then I realized that this is a story that tries to prove a man's innocence on a homicide without the side of the victim at all. So his victim's side is completely absent. This happens because of bias in the media. And that makes sense because whenever an issue is presented in the media, a writer's bias is automatically attached to it. And I really don't think there's anything you can do to change that. But what they do in Making a Murderer is that they've created these massive amounts of angry viewers who believe that this man is innocent only because they cannot see both sides of the story, simply because it's not presented to them. So there's their little angry fists. And it makes them do stupid things. People have gotten death threats in this man's county, and they probably didn't deserve that. So my claim for my argument: investigative journalists need to answer to a moral code when covering extreme issues because they are the most easily accessible source of information for the public. In contrast, the film Dear Zachary, Netflix released this before Making a Murderer, I should say that. The film Dear Zachary, it's supposed to be a letter to a son about his father. It's another true crime documentary, and it takes an alternative route to the viewer's psyche. It focuses around the story of Andrew Bagby, who's the man on the right there, and his relationship with a woman named Shirley, who eventually kills him out of a romantic dispute. So she murders him. It's another homicide case. The plot thickens when she seeks asylum in Canada, and also when everyone finds out she's pregnant with Andrew's kid, and that kid is Zachary. The documentary centers around the filmmaker flying all over the world to interview Andrew's friends and family about him in order to make something to give to Zachary when he gets older, so he can have some kind of idea of what his father was. So naturally, if we revisit our Netflix viewers over here, this makes them a little more sad, and that's completely fair, but this is another use of influence. This is a different way. This is a different way to see it. This is the victim side. So instead of being 100% angry, they feel a little differently about it. And it's hard to be upset for people for doing this. It's hard to be upset for these filmmakers for playing off of our emotions, because what they're doing is 100% legal. They are absolutely protected by their First Amendment right to free speech. And this is the First Amendment, and it's kind of shrugging at you because there's not much it can do. And so it's really more of a matter of personal ethics. And where personal ethics actually comes into play with this is the idea that these filmmakers, these producers, seem to think that homicide is something that can be packaged up and sold to the highest bidder through whatever bias, whatever method makes it so emotionally reactionary for the audience. In a solution to this and how we could fix this, we have to figure out what justice means to us. So there are two forms of justice, conservative and reformative justice. Conservative justice is formed on the idea of people wanting to keep kind of things the same and really respect institutions that already exist, while reformative justice embraces marginalized groups and tries to kind of right social wrongs, if you will. There's also a thing in journalism called a responsibility continuum, and I'm drawing it as a thermometer, because the way that they think about responsibility continuum is that writers and journalists have the lowest responsibility when covering social issues. So that's down at the bottom, and then they have the highest responsibility covering personal issues. So it's hard to place a true crime piece on this scale, especially the one with Making a Murderer, because that man had some social issues. He was a member of the lower class, but it quickly escalates to a personal issue because you're dealing with Stephen Avery's personal ethics at that point. This entire case is developing off of what this man did or did not do in this murder. So in that case, it deserves to be covered with the utmost level of responsibility. And that kind of brings me to this new idea that perhaps it's not an issue of bias in the media, because we really can't avoid that, but it is an issue of intention and what the writer is intending to do with their piece. And that's something you really can control. That's something we definitely can change. People need to think about what they can do or what they're putting out into the world and why they're doing it. And what kind of change they're seeking to produce because of that. So we can take these two documentaries and we can pit them against each other as far as the writer's intentions. So Making a Murderer on the left and then Dear Zachary on the right. Making a Murderer, from what I can gather, it seems like the producers were really intent on proving his innocence, but to a point where it becomes a fault, because what they're working on is not truth. It's just his innocence, and that may or may not be true, but I promise that the truth has two sides to it, and they do not show that. And then when we look at Dear Zachary, let that catch up for a second. When we look at Dear Zachary, we see the filmmaker who I believe was intending to seek justice in its most pure form. Because I really haven't told you everything about Dear Zachary. If you haven't seen it yet, here's a drawing of little Zachary right here, and his documentary that the filmmaker wants to give to him, but he's never given it because Shirley comes back into the picture, and one day when she's taking care of him, she commits murder-suicide with him. So Shirley and Zachary are dead today. So the filmmaker is also Andrew Bagby's best friend. He's also the victim's best friend. And he didn't really know quite what to do with this documentary at this point, because this was for Zachary. This was supposed to be something for him. So instead, what he chooses to do is he still makes use for it, and he gives it to the public as a matter of helping other people that deal with homicide, that are dealing with cases of injustice like this, that are part of the victims' families. And that's very important because it's delivering a piece of true crime, something that true crime normally can't do, and that's being able to cope with what's happened. So in conclusion, homicide is not something that you can just package up and sell to the highest bidder. It's always a personal story. It's always about someone's real life. Every situation of injustice deserves a high level of sensitivity, and a moral compass has to be present. It's always personal. And as for journalists, for writers, I think it comes down to a very simple point. Don't be a jerk. And always write ethically.